The lights inside the Grand Ireland's Got Talent Theatre rose slowly, revealing a small, fragile figure standing alone at the center of the massive stage. It was a Cebuano boy, no older than 13, wearing a faded t-shirt and pants that were clearly too big for him. His clothes were washed many times, the colors almost gone, but they were neat and clean, the best he had. His bare feet touched the cold stage floor, and he held a scratched old guitar, the wood chipped at the edges, showing years of use. His hands trembled, not just from nervousness but from the weight of everything he had carried in his young life. The audience exchanged whispers the moment they saw him. Some people tilted their heads with concern, others felt immediate sympathy. He looked lost, overwhelmed by the size of the theater and the thousands of eyes staring at him. One of the judges leaned forward with genuine worry on her face and asked softly, "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Her voice echoed through the silent hall, carrying warmth he wasn't used to. He nodded shyly, his voice small but steady. He explained that he came from Cebu, that his family struggled every day, and that he sang in the streets to help his mother buy food. Hearing this, the judges exchanged emotional looks. One judge wiped his eye discreetly, already moved before the performance even began. The boy then positioned his fingers on the guitar strings, took a shaky breath, and began to play the opening chords of Hotel California. The first notes rang out softly, almost fragile. But as his voice entered the song, everything changed. He sang with a rawness that only someone who had lived real hardship could express. His voice wasn't polished or trained, but it was honest, aching with stories of hunger, loneliness, and hope. The audience grew completely silent. Even the smallest cough or rustle disappeared. The judges leaned forward, eyes fixed on him, as though afraid to blink and miss a second. Every lyric he sang carried the weight of the nights he spent singing for coins, the days he walked barefoot under the sun, and the dreams he kept hidden in his heart. One judge placed his hand over his mouth, visibly shaking from the unexpected emotional punch of the performance. Another judge wiped tears quickly, overwhelmed by the boy's sincerity. The theater felt like it wasn't just witnessing a performance but a confession, a lifetime of pain and hope poured into a single song. By the time he reached the last line of the first verse, the judges were already broken, and the audience had fallen completely under his spell. The boy from Cebu had turned the giant stage into the story of his life. As the Cebuano boy continued singing, something powerful began to shift inside the theater. The opening nerves had melted away, replaced by a voice that carried every scar and every dream he had ever held. Midway through the performance, the music seemed to grow with him. His small hands moved confidently across the guitar strings, striking each note with a mixture of fear and determination. His eyes slowly closed, not out of shyness anymore, but as if he was reaching deep into memories that shaped him, nights of singing under streetlights, mornings of going hungry, and days when all he had was his voice to survive. The audience could feel the change instantly. The air thickened with emotion, and people leaned forward in their seats as if pulled by an invisible thread. A woman in the front row pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. The camera zoomed in, capturing the trembling in her lip, the shimmer of moisture gathering in her eyes, and the disbelief etched across her face. No one had expected a child who looked so fragile to carry such a powerful storm within him. On the judges' panel, reactions grew even more intense. One judge gripped the edge of the table tightly, his knuckles turning white. His entire body shook slightly, not out of fear but from the overwhelming emotion washing over him. He whispered something under his breath, words that were swallowed by the music, but the expression on his face showed he was fighting to keep his composure. The judge beside him was already losing that battle. Tears streamed down her cheeks freely, and she didn't care who saw. She wiped her eyes once, twice, then gave up, letting the emotion take over. The third judge, usually stern and analytical, stood up slowly, almost involuntarily. He pressed his hand over his heart as he watched the boy pour his soul into the lyrics. His jaw clenched as if he was trying not to break down completely. Even backstage staff had stopped what they were doing. Stagehands, camera operators, and runners gathered in the wings, whispering to each other about the unbelievable voice coming from the stage. As the boy reached the bridge of the song, his voice cracked, not out of weakness, but from a surge of pure emotion he could no longer contain. The crack echoed through the hall like the sound of a heart breaking open. For a moment, the theater felt as if it were holding its breath. When he pushed into the final chorus, his voice rose again, stronger, fuller, carrying every dream he had ever dared to dream. The judges were no longer just watching a performance, they were witnessing a child transform his pain into something beautiful. And by the time he reached the last note, the theater was utterly silent, stunned, shattered, and spellbound. When the final note faded into the vast silence of the theater, it felt as if the entire world froze in that single breath. The Cebuano boy stood motionless at the center of the stage, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion and fear. His fingers slowly loosened around the neck of his old guitar, and his eyes lowered to the floor, as if he wasn't sure whether he had done well or failed. He had never performed for such a huge crowd before. He had never heard his own voice echo so loudly. For a moment, he looked like a child bracing himself for disappointment. But the silence didn't last long. It shattered into a powerful wave of applause that rolled through the theater like thunder. People leapt to their feet, cheering, crying, shouting his name even though they had only just learned it. The boy flinched in surprise, his eyes widening as he slowly lifted his head. He wasn't used to applause, he was used to people passing by him on the street, barely listening, sometimes ignoring him completely. This was a sound he had dreamed of but never believed he would hear. One of the judges stood up immediately, unable to remain seated. His voice shook as he said, "You didn't just sing. You opened your heart to us." The judge's eyes were red, and the audience could see the sincerity pouring out of him. Another judge rose beside him, wiping tears continuously from her cheeks. She tried to speak but her voice cracked, and she pressed her hand against her chest as she whispered, "You moved us more than you will ever understand." The third judge leaned forward and said softly, "What you did tonight, that was magic." His voice trembled, and the boy blinked at him with uncertainty, unsure how to react to kindness he seldom received in life. Then something happened that made the entire theater gasp. One judge stepped away from the panel, tears shining on her cheeks. She walked slowly toward the golden buzzer button. Her hand hovered above it, shaking with emotion. She looked back at the boy, this little kid from Cebu, barefoot, trembling, holding a broken guitar, and she whispered, "This is for every child who never gets a chance." Her hand came down with force. A loud, echoing buzz filled the hall as golden confetti burst from the ceiling, raining down like a miracle. The boy dropped to his knees, overwhelmed, his small hands covering his face as he cried openly. The judges rushed toward him, hugging him tightly as the confetti swirled around them. In that moment, the poor street boy from Cebu wasn't poor anymore. He had a future, a voice, and the world finally listening.